Hi everyone, this is Nia and today I'm going to paint this autumn cottage. I did something similar last year, but I know a lot of you enjoy this subject matter, so let's make another one. I've decided to use my square sketchbook to paint this one, and I'm going to start by sketching out the basic outline of the house before adding on the features just to make sure it's positioned in the middle. Once I'm happy with how centered it is, I'm going to start adding the chimney and the roof, and then I'm going to start adding the doors and windows very roughly. You can see my lines are very scratchy. I'm doing this very quickly just to get the ideas out of my head first. I have the basic idea of the house now, so I'm going to help frame it with some shrubs and bushes. You can add other types of plants too if you have any other ideas. I'm also going to add a really branchy tree or a dormant tree at the back just to extend the composition upwards and fill in the space. I feel like I'm quite happy with how this is looking, so I'm going to start cleaning out the lines and also adding the smaller details. Like this is clean enough, so I'm going to clip it in place and let's go over the colors. Firstly, this is New Gamboge by Daniel Smith, Payne's Grey Bluish by Schmincke, Terre Verte by Holbein, Crimson Lake by Holbein, Vermilion by Holbein, Burnt Umber by Holbein, Yellow Ochre by Holbein, and Jaune Brilliant Dark by Schmincke. I'm also going to use this pen by Snowman. This is a black and a 0.1. And also this Faber-Castell watercolor colored pencil. This is a dark brown. And lastly, I'm also going to use this white pen. This is unbranded. You can also substitute with white gouache or bleed-proof white. Let's begin to paint. I'm going to start with the shrubs, and because this is autumn themed, I'm going to use reds, browns, and muted greens. Here I'm starting with just vermilion, then I'm going to use a darker red by adding Crimson Lake just to give it a bit of volume. And for some color variation, I also added a little bit of yellow ochre. Moving on to the shrubs, I've mixed Terre Verte, Vermilion, and also yellow ochre, and you can see how I've divided up my palette. This way I can play around with the ratio and create different variations. I like to use Terre Verte as the main green, and I can add yellow ochre if I want this to look more of a yellow green but still muted, or I can turn it into more of a brownish green by adding Vermilion or Crimson Lake. You can also create bushes with multiple colors, so you can see that there are patches of orange and reds and greens in one of the bushes that I made. And at the bottom here, I've mixed Terre Verte with a bit of Payne's Grey Bluish to get more of a bluish green, but it's still nice and muted. And I feel like because of the muted nature of this color, the tones will still be consistent with the rest of the warm colors. Moving on to the door, I'm using this mixture of Terre Verte with a lot of Payne's Grey Bluish, and it turns into this really deep and rich dark green. And I'm also going to use this color to paint the window frames as well. I'm also going to use green for the exterior shutters, and for this I use Terre Verte as the dominant color, but I've mixed it with the previous green mixture, which probably has a little bit of yellow ochre and the tiniest bit of vermilion. Now moving on to the roof, I use vermilion as the main color, but it's mixed with a bit of that brown mixture, which probably has a little bit of Crimson Lake as well as Terre Verte, or you can also use vermilion with a touch of burnt umber. I'm going to pair the roof with some dark wood underneath it. And for the mixture, I'm going to use burnt umber with Payne's Grey Bluish. Next, I'm going to paint the chimney, and for this I use the red and crimson lake mixture on my palette, and I just added more yellow ochre in the mixture. This is also when I realized that my paper is damaged again. I know I say this a lot, but it's just because I live in such a humid place, and if I leave my sketchbook in the wrong room, which is actually my filming room where it gets a lot of sunlight, I guess the humidity and the heat just kills it. It's kind of sad considering I haven't finished the sketchbook, but I might try to figure out what to paint with it still. But anyway, I just kept pushing through with this painting, even though I know the color are not going to pop out as much as I would like them to. Now, going back to the colors though, I used purely new Gamboge for the lights, and as for the details of the brick parts, I used a similar mixture to the chimney, but this just has more vermilion, and I used a light to medium consistency for the base. As for the rest of the exterior wall, I used Jaune Brilliant Dark as the main color, and I darkened it and muted a little bit with Payne's Grey Bluish and also some yellow ochre. I'm using a really light consistency, but now you can really see the damage on the paper and it looks quite dark, but it's actually going to seep into the paper and dry much lighter. Now moving on to the windows, I use Payne's Grey Bluish with a little bit of burnt umber, and I'm using a really light consistency, and I'm painting it diagonally and leaving some white space in between so it looks like reflections. For the stairs, I'm just going to use a gray. This is the same mixture as the window, but it has more burnt umber. Next, I'm going to start adding the brick textures. This is from the same color as the base, but I'm using a medium consistency this time. So just as a reminder, this has Crimson Lake, Vermilion, probably a little bit of Terre Verte to turn it into more of a brownish tone, and also yellow ochre. To paint the bricks, I started out by doing dashed lines that were a little bit messy, but I'm going to go over this again later on. I just made the color a bit more concentrated where I feel like it's going to be the darkest, which is next to the entrance. I really love this detail, so for the arches, instead of doing the dashed lines horizontally, I made the lines follow the curvature of the arch, and I'm also going to do the same for the arch on top of the window. I I want to add natural stone textures to the exterior, so for this I'm just painting circles or blobs or even ovals in different sizes, randomly placing them in a thin consistency. You can use any color for this. I just used the brick mixture from earlier, but I added a little bit of Payne's Grey Bluish and some yellow ochre. I wasn't sure what I was going to do for this one, whether I want to add the stones or not, so I just used a really thin consistency of the same color for the stones, and I just glazed over it. I'm going to add a bit of shadow underneath the wooden beams just so it looks separated from the exterior of the house. This is just the same color as the wooden beams themselves, but in a thicker consistency. For the chimney, I want to make the brick color a bit different. This is an orange mixture from vermilion and yellow ochre. At this point, I wasn't sure yet whether I want to cover the whole chimney with brick textures, so I just painted patches of them, but at the very end, I didn't really like it because there was too much contrast from the texture and the base color, so I ended up painting the dashed lines over the whole chimney. I'm going to start adding some details on the door as well as the exterior shutters, and for this I'm just using the same color as the door. This is from Payne's Grey Bluish with Terre Verte. I am using a slightly thicker consistency this time though. I'm going to go back to the stone wall on the entranceway, though the stones looked visible before, but once it's dry I feel like it just looks very patchy. So I'm going to use a thin consistency dark brown. This is from the same color as the wooden beams, and I'm just using a light load to outline around the stones that I initially painted. I quite like how the outline looks as the stones stand out a bit better, so I'm also going to create an outline to the rest of the wall on the right hand side of the house, but because I feel like the base is a bit too light, I'm also going to paint another layer which is a bit patchy, similar to the stones in the entranceway before outlining. Now going back to the door, I'm using the same dark green. I'm going to add a shadow underneath the archway, and I'm also going to add thin lines to show that the door has a slight wooden texture. With the greens that I've already pre-mixed on my palette, especially with the dark greens, I can also add some of the lighter greens at the top. I'm going to add shadows to the shrubs. I'm placing it underneath, or for the larger shrubs, I like to also divide the shape up slightly. And this will just give a bit of volume to them so they don't look too flat. Next, I'm just going to use this light brown to paint the walkway and also the light green to paint the front lawn. You can see that I'm using quite a heavy load on my brush so I can spread it as quickly as possible so I don't accidentally make it patchy once the paint settles in the damaged paper. Now for the background, I got a bit nervous because I wanted the background to fade, and it's a bit difficult when the paper is acting up, but I really wanted the background to fade into the white of the paper, so I started by dampening the areas around the house while leaving the smoke on the chimney that I outlined with pencil earlier. Then I'm going to use Payne's Grey Bluish, first placing it close to the house, then extending the colors outwards using a clean damp brush until it disappears into the white of the paper. You can see because of the damaged paper, the paint just seeps in, and it's really difficult to pull the paint to create a soft transition, but I'm just going to keep adding to it once the paper isn't too wet. I'm sure your paintings won't have this problem though if you use undamaged good watercolor paper. I feel like that's enough for the background for now, so I'm going to dry it off completely. Then I'm going to use a dark brown from Payne's Grey Bluish and Burnt Umber to paint the branches. I started by using my round brush, but then I felt like it was a little bit difficult, or it would take too long for me to paint the finer branches. So I switched to my dagger brush, or you can also switch to a size 0 brush or a liner brush. After adding the main large branches, I'm going to keep adding smaller ones, so they're going to look fairly dense. Next, I'm going to increase the saturation for certain parts of the house. Here I'm going over the brick on the chimney again, and I'm just going to look around and try to balance out the colors for now. I also tried to outline or give a little bit more dimension to the beams so they don't look flat, and I'm just outlining one side using the same color in a slightly darker value. Next, I'm going to give a bit of height to the lawn, and for this I'm just going to outline one side of the lawn as if there's a bit of shadow showing the height of the grass. I almost forgot, but I also sketched out a tree in front of this house, so I'm just going to paint it slanted towards the house to help frame it. I'm just going to use my dagger brush and put a bit more pressure as I get to the main tree trunk. Then I'm going to paint the leaves on the branches, and for this I used a mix of vermilion, crimson lake, and a little bit of brown. Just like the shrubs, I decided to add more burnt umber with a little bit of Payne's Grey Bluish to paint some darker leaves, and this will just add a bit more volume. I'm also going to use the same color in a thick consistency to paint the roof tiles, and I'm just treating this as I'm painting the bricks. For some pop of color, I decided to also use a thick consistency of crimson lake to paint some dots to represent flowers on the bushes. Now for the exterior lamps or lights, I decided to just draw an outline with my pen just to make it much easier. You can also use your brushes, but I feel that this is so much faster and easier to control. I'm just going to reuse the pre-mixed colors on my palette. I'm looking for a dark brown to paint shadows underneath the roof, and something that is a bit more gray to paint under the beams. For that, I just added a touch of Payne's Grey Bluish, and I'm going to balance out the whole painting by adding these shadows. I'm also going to do the same for the tree and the plant by the windowsill. The shadows will just help push the tree forward instead of the leaves merging with the wall. After this, I'm going to add some outlines with my pen and also my colored pencil for extra details. And I'm also going to adjust the colors if I need to darken certain areas or add some final touch-ups and details. You can paint this on, but I find it so much easier to draw it with a pencil. I decided to add some arch brick pavement to keep with the arch theme from the window and the door, but you can also do other patterns like cobblestones or other ideas. And here I'm just going to add a bit of glow by using new Gamboge. For the doorknobs, I decided to add these old looking door handles. I started out with my white pen to give a nice base, and then I used a little bit of yellow ochre to paint it, and I also added a pen outline to help it stand out more. I just felt like adding two birds in the sky would help with the composition, so I painted a couple of them, which I've simplified as two curved lines in different angles. I also decided to extend the background and add some warmth. I first used a thin consistency of Payne's Grey Bluish, then I added a really thin consistency of burnt umber as well that I smudged into the background. Then I'm just going to dry everything off before adding the final touches. I'm just going to add a bit more shadows and outlines, and that's basically it for this painting. It was quite a long one because I had to do so many back and forths to get the color to come out on the damaged paper, but it is what it is. I still had fun designing and putting it all together, and I hope you still enjoyed it as well. Like usual, the list of tools as well as my social media links will be in the description box. Thank you so much for watching till the end, and I'll see you guys at the next one. Bye!